My name is Destiny Evans. As when I was 18, my half sister falsely accused me of stealing her gold bracelet, and she claimed she saw me take it and hide it in my backpack. I tried to explain that I had never touched it, but she wouldn't listen. Oisa. My aunt stormed in, grabbed my arm, and pushed me toward the front door. Get out of this house, she said. So my father yelled, Get out. We believe your sister. They didn't give me any time to defend myself. They stuffed my clothes into a trash bag and shoved me out the door. I stood there with my bag in hand and called my mother. She answered on the first ring. I told her what happened. She said, I'm coming to get you. I'll drive the 4 hours. Just wait for me. 4 hours later, her car pulled up. She got out, took the bag from me, and said, Get in the car. We're leaving. That night changed everything. If you've ever been falsely accused by your sibling and had your own family turn their backs on you in one night, hit the like button and tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. The morning light came through the curtains as I stood in the living room with the trash bag at my feet. I moved quickly through the house, picking up the few clothes that still fit in the bag, along with my school notebook and a pair of worn sneakers. Every sound made me glance toward the hallway, but no one came out to stop me. I zipped the bag shut and stepped onto the porch without looking back. Christina pulled up in her old sedan just as I reached the curb. She stepped out, took the bag from my hands, and placed it in the trunk without saying much. We drove away from the Evanston house in silence at first. The highway stretched ahead. Elsa. Familiar exits gave way to new neighborhoods closer to the city center. After nearly an hour, she finally spoke. You can stay with me as long as you need. My place isn't big, but it's yours now too. Her apartment sat on the second floor of a quiet brick building in a different part of Chicago. The living room had a worn couch, a small kitchen table, and one extra bedroom that smelled of fresh paint. I set my bag down in the corner and helped her unload a few groceries she had bought on the way. We arranged the space together, moving a lamp and clearing a drawer for my things. For the first time in hours, the tightness in my chest eased a little. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. Christina handed it to me. It's Caleb. He wants to talk to you, but I took the call. His voice sounded small on the other end. Destiny, are you okay? Dad said you left, but he wouldn't tell me why. I kept my answer short and calm, telling him I was safe with our mom and that I would explain more when he was older. He asked if he could visit sometime. I said yes, and we ended the call after a few minutes. Hearing him made the whole situation feel heavier, but also clearer. The next few days settled into a new routine. Christina left for her shift at the hospital early each morning, so I took care of simple things around the apartment. I washed the dishes, folded laundry, and made a list of places hiring near us. By the end of the first week, I had filled out applications at 3 coffee shops and a grocery store within walking distance. One manager called me back the same day and told me to come in for a trial shift. I showed up wearing the only clean shirt I owned and learned how to run the register and stock shelves. The work kept my hands busy and my mind from replaying that night over and over. Christina came home after her shift and asked how the day went. I told her about the customers and the small mistakes I made. She listened while we ate simple pasta at the kitchen table and then said, Bata, one day at a time. We'll figure the rest out together. Evenings became our quiet time. We sat on the couch watching whatever was on television, or she helped me look at community college brochures. I started saving every dollar from the job for bus fare and school supplies. Caleb called again a few days later, this time asking more questions about school and whether I missed anything from the old house. I answered honestly, but kept the details light so he wouldn't worry too much. By the end of the second week, I had picked up extra hours at the grocery store. My feet ached from standing all day, but the paycheck felt like proof that I could stand on my own. Christina never pushed me to talk about what happened that night. Instead, she left small notes on the fridge with reminders about bus schedules or encouragement for my applications. The apartment slowly started to feel less like a temporary stop and more like a place where I could breathe. One evening after my shift, I came home to find Christina had left dinner warming on the stove. I ate alone at first, then heard her key in the door. She joined me at the table and we talked about normal things, her long shifts, my new coworkers, and the classes I wanted to take next semester. For the first time since leaving Evanston, I allowed myself to think beyond the next day. The weight of that single night still sat in the back of my mind, but the days ahead started to feel possible. Weeks turned into a steady rhythm inside the apartment. I signed up for night classes at the local community college to finish my high school credits faster. The schedule left little free time, so I picked up double shifts waiting tables at a busy diner downtown. The work started right after my morning classes and often ran past midnight. The first shift felt overwhelming with trays full of plates and constant orders shouted from the kitchen. I learned quickly how to balance everything while keeping a smile for customers who left decent tips. My feet throbbed by the end of each night, but the extra money went straight into a jar for future tuition. Christina noticed the long hours and left protein bars on the counter for me to grab before leaving. One evening, my phone buzzed while I was wiping down tables during a slow moment. The number looked familiar from the old house. I stepped outside into the cool air and answered. Savannah spoke first, her voice careful. Destiny. I need to talk to you about what happened. Kia, can you just listen for a minute? I stayed silent for a second, then cut in. I don't want to hear it right now. She tried again, saying she had something important to explain about the bracelet and how things got out of hand. I repeated that I wasn't ready and ended the call without waiting for more. My hands shook slightly as I put the phone away and went back inside to finish my shift. The next morning, a text came from Caleb. He asked how school was going and whether I had made any new friends yet. I replied with short updates about my classes and the diner job. He sent back a few emojis and said he wished he could visit again soon. Reading his message brought a small comfort amid the exhaustion. Later that day, Christina came home from her hospital shift and found me studying at the kitchen table, and I told her about the phone call from Savannah and how I had shut it down immediately. She listened without interrupting, then asked how it made me feel. I admitted the anger still sat heavy, mixed with confusion over why my own sister would do something like that. Christina nodded and said we could talk more whenever I wanted, but she wouldn't push. The weeks continued with the same demanding pace. I finished one set of night classes and immediately enrolled in the next level. The diner manager gave me more responsibility after I handled a large group without mistakes. Tips improved slightly, enough to cover bus passes and a few new notebooks. I kept track of every dollar in a small notebook I carried in my bag. Caleb texted more often as the months passed. Sometimes he shared funny stories from his school day or asked simple questions about what I was learning. I answered as honestly as I could without going into the heavier details. Those short exchanges became a quiet connection that reminded me not everything from the old life had disappeared. One quiet afternoon, Christina and I sat at the table going over my latest report card. The grades were solid despite the long hours. She pointed out how much progress I had made in such a short time. I mentioned the latest message from Caleb and how it felt strange to keep parts of my life hidden from him. She suggested that protecting him from the full story might be the kindest choice for now. The diner shifts grew busier as holidays approached. I worked through crowded evenings and learned to move faster between tables. The physical tiredness helped push away thoughts of that single phone call from Savannah. I focused instead on saving enough for the next semester and building a routine that felt stable. Christina started leaving notes with simple encouragement on days when my schedule looked especially full. I appreciated the support without needing long conversations about the past. The apartment had become a space where I could concentrate on moving forward rather than looking back. By the end of those months, I had completed another round of classes and picked up even more hours at the diner. The money added up slowly but steadily. Caleb sent another text asking about my plans for the coming year. I replied that I was focusing on school and work for now. The quiet support from both Christina and those occasional messages from Caleb helped carry me through the long days. Time passed and my credits accumulated at the community college. I applied for every scholarship listed on the bulletin board and submitted the paperwork on the final deadline day. Weeks later, an email arrived confirming I had received a full ride award covering tuition, books, and a small stipend for the next 2 semesters at the local campus. The news came during a quiet evening. I showed the letter to Christina across the kitchen table. She read it twice, then looked up with a steady expression. "This is a solid start. You earned it." We discussed the registration process and the classes I planned to take. The conversation felt practical rather than celebratory. A few Saturdays after that, Caleb arrived for his first visit. Christina picked him up from the train station while I waited at the apartment. He walked through the door carrying a small backpack, taller than I remembered at 14. He scanned the living room before setting the bag down. "Hey, Destiny. Mom said I could stay the weekend. We spent the afternoon showing him the neighborhood routes and the nearest park. He asked about my classes and what the campus looked like. I answered with details about the lecture halls and the library hours. Christina prepared a simple meal and we ate together at the table. Caleb talked about his own school projects and mentioned that things at the old house remained busy but quiet. Later that evening, the three of us sat in the living room. I shared my longer term plans, explaining how I intended to transfer to a 4-year program after finishing the community college requirements. Christina added practical advice about financial aid forms and part time job options on campus. Caleb listened closely and asked whether he could come visit again once I started the new school. I told him the door would always be open for him here. The next morning, a letter appeared in the mailbox addressed to me in handwriting I recognized from the old house. Savannah had sent it, so. The envelope felt thick in my hand. I carried it inside and placed it unopened on the counter. Christina noticed but said nothing at first. When she finally asked if I planned to read it, I shook my head. Not today, maybe not ever. She nodded once and we moved on to other topics. Caleb and I walked to the corner store that afternoon to pick up snacks. He brought up lighter subjects like video games and upcoming school events. I kept the conversation easy, avoiding any mention of the letter or past events. Back at the apartment, we played a board game Christina had found in a drawer. The afternoon passed with small laughs and simple rules explanations. Christina drove Caleb back to the station on Sunday evening. Before he left, he hugged me quickly and said he hoped I kept doing well with the scholarship. I watched the car pull away and returned upstairs. The unopened letter still sat on the counter. I moved it to a drawer without looking inside and focused instead on the registration forms for the next semester. The following weeks involved orientation sessions at the community college. I attended every session, mapped out my class schedule, and met with an advisor about transfer credits. The full ride meant I could reduce my work hours slightly while keeping enough income for daily needs. Christina helped review the budget one night, suggesting ways to stretch the stipend further. Caleb texted a few times after his visit, sharing updates from his classes and asking occasional questions about college life. I replied with straightforward answers. The letter from Savannah remained untouched in the drawer. Each time I saw the drawer, I remembered its presence but chose to leave it closed. The semester started with early morning lectures and afternoon study sessions in the library. I joined a study group for the tougher subjects and took notes carefully. Christina continued her hospital shifts but made sure to check in on my progress during our evening meals. The routine felt more structured than before, built around the opportunities the scholarship provided. One weekend, Christina suggested we plan a small celebration for completing the first month of classes. We kept it low-key with a home-cooked dinner and conversation about future goals. Caleb called during the meal to say hello. Hearing his voice reminded me of the growing distance between the two parts of my life. The unopened letter stayed in its place. I focused on the classes, the advisor meetings, and the steady support inside the apartment. The scholarship marked a clear step forward, and I intended to make the most of it without looking back at what had been left behind. The university transfer happened smoothly after the community college credits cleared. I enrolled in the 4-year program with a declared major in psychology. Lectures covered human behavior patterns, research methods, and case analysis from real clinical settings. The pace required focused note-taking and regular group discussions that extended into evening hours. Christina adjusted her shifts to help with transportation on heavier class days. We reviewed the new syllabus together at the kitchen table and marked exam dates on the calendar. The campus felt larger than the previous one, with more buildings and student activity centers that kept the environment busy. 3 years had passed since leaving the Evanston house. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a message from the university security office about 2 visitors asking for me by name, and I went to the administration building and saw Brian and Aunt Michelle waiting in the lobby. Brian spoke first, suggesting we find a quiet place to talk. Aunt Michelle stood beside him with a serious expression. I stopped a few feet away and shook my head. I don't have time for this discussion. Brian tried to explain that they had come a long distance and wanted to clear the air. Aunt Michelle added that certain matters needed addressing in person. I repeated that I had classes to attend and turned toward the exit without further conversation. Security escorted them out while I returned to my afternoon lecture. The incident stayed in my mind through the rest of the day. I focused on the professor's explanations of cognitive development theories to push the encounter aside. Christina noticed my quieter mood when I returned home and asked if anything unusual had occurred on campus. I described the visit briefly and confirmed my decision to keep distance. Caleb texted the following evening. At 15, he sounded more observant than before. He mentioned that the atmosphere at the old house had grown tense lately, with more arguments and longer silences. I asked simple follow up questions about his school activities instead of diving deeper. He shared details about upcoming tests and a sports practice schedule. Christina and I discussed the campus visit during a weekend breakfast. I explained how the sudden appearance caught me off guard, but reinforced my choice to stay focused on current responsibilities. She listened and offered practical advice about campus resources for students dealing with family matters. The conversation remained grounded in daily routines rather than past events. The psychology program continued with advanced courses on abnormal behavior and research ethics. I joined a small lab team working on survey design for stress studies among college students. The hands-on work required collecting data and analyzing preliminary results during scheduled sessions. Caleb called one weekend when Christina was at work. He described recent changes around the house, including fewer family meals and more closed doors. I kept my responses neutral and shifted the topic to his interests in technology classes. Wow. He asked about my own projects. Dada sa and I described the survey questions we had developed for the lab, and midterm week brought longer library hours and group review sessions. I prepared presentation slides on attachment theory and practice delivery with classmates. The material connected directly to observations from everyday interactions, making the study hours productive. Another attempt from Brian came through a voicemail a few weeks later. He left a short message about wanting to understand my perspective. I deleted it without replying and blocked the number to prevent future calls. The action felt necessary to maintain clear boundaries during a demanding semester. Caleb continued sending occasional updates through text. He shared a photo from a school event and asked about my favorite classes. I replied with straightforward answers about lecture topics and upcoming assignments. Those brief exchanges provided a limited window into his life without crossing into heavier territories. Christina attended a campus open house with me one Saturday. We walked through the psychology department and spoke with faculty about internship opportunities. The visit highlighted practical steps for the following year and strengthened the routine support at home. The semester progressed with final papers and lab reports. I submitted work on time and received feedback that encouraged continued effort in research methods. The program demanded consistent performance, and I tracked progress through detailed notes. One evening, Caleb mentioned in a message that tensions at the old house had not eased. I acknowledged the note but did not pursue details. Instead, I asked about his plans for the summer break. The response stayed light and forward-looking. The year moved steadily through final exams and project deadlines. I completed requirements for the current level and prepared materials for advanced courses ahead. Christina reviewed the academic summary with me and noted areas of improvement. The campus visit from Brian and Aunt Michelle remained a single event that did not disrupt the established path. Caleb's messages became part of the regular rhythm. Each one reminded me of the separate realities we navigated. The psychology studies provided tools to understand family dynamics from an objective distance while I built my own stable routine. Senior year intensified with thesis revisions and leadership roles in the psychology club. I maintained top grades across all courses and earned recognition as the department's highest-ranking student for the graduating class. The valedictorian nomination required an application packet that included academic records and a proposed speech topic on overcoming adversity through chosen support networks. Christina reviewed the submission materials with me at the kitchen table one weekend. She suggested adjustments to the supporting examples to keep the content professional. The committee reviewed applications over several weeks before announcing the selection via official email. The confirmation arrived during a morning lecture break, and I forwarded it to Christina right away. Savannah made one final attempt through a mutual acquaintance who passed along a request for an in-person meeting. The message indicated a desire to discuss past events and seek some form of resolution. I responded directly with a short reply stating there was nothing left to discuss and requested no further contact. The exchange ended there without additional follow-up. Preparation for the valedictorian speech became the central focus alongside final thesis edits. I drafted multiple versions emphasizing personal growth and the value of reliable guidance. Christina offered to listen to practice sessions after her shifts. What? We scheduled evening rehearsals where she sat at the table and provided notes on delivery pace and transitions between sections. One rehearsal ran longer than expected, so Christina suggested breaking the speech into key segments for targeted improvement. She pointed out areas where the language could connect more clearly with the audience. I revised the script based on her input and practiced again the next day. The process required balancing speech work with remaining course assignments. Caleb sent a message asking about the upcoming ceremony details. I shared the basic schedule without expanding on the speech content. He expressed interest in the event and mentioned his own school milestones. Our conversation stayed focused on logistics and forward plans. Christina continued supporting the rehearsal routine by recording sessions on her phone for playback review. We analyzed timing and emphasis together, making small cuts to fit the allocated slot. Her observations helped refine the tone to sound confident yet approachable. The sessions built steadily as the ceremony date approached. The Psychology Club organized a farewell event for graduating members. I presented a summary of my thesis findings during the gathering. Faculty members attended and offered congratulations on the valedictorian selection. The evening provided a brief pause from intensive preparation while reinforcing academic accomplishments. Savannah's earlier request remained unanswered beyond my clear statement. I adjusted contact settings across platforms to prevent additional messages. The decision allowed full concentration on polishing the speech and completing final requirements. Christina suggested incorporating specific examples of steady encouragement into the script. We worked through several drafts until the flow felt natural. During one late session, she timed the delivery and noted improvements in vocal projection. The collaborative effort strengthened the overall structure without altering the core message. Final thesis defense occurred midweek with a panel of 3 professors. I presented the research conclusions and fielded questions on methodology and implications. The session concluded successfully and cleared the path for full graduation eligibility. Caleb followed up with another text about transportation options for the ceremony. I confirmed the venue details and noted that attendance was open. Christina coordinated her work schedule to ensure availability for the day. We reviewed the printed program together and marked the speech slot. Rehearsals continued in the apartment living room with Christina providing consistent feedback. She helped identify phrases that carried stronger impact and recommended pauses for audience engagement. The practice built familiarity with the material and reduced nervousness about public delivery. The department held a pre-ceremony workshop for honorees. I attended and received guidance on stage presence and microphone technique. Christina waited outside and discussed the session highlights on the drive home. The workshop complemented our home rehearsals effectively. As the final weeks progressed, I finalized all academic submissions and confirmed participation details. Christina assisted with organizing supporting documents and suggested a quiet evening routine to maintain focus. The speech evolved through iterative refinements based on her practical observations. Caleb's messages continued at regular intervals with updates on his activities. I replied with brief acknowledgments and questions about his progress. The exchanges provided a limited connection without venturing into unresolved matters. The preparation phase concluded with a complete run-through that met the time requirement. Christina offered final encouragement before we reviewed the schedule one last time. The year had culminated in academic recognition and a structured approach to the public address. Graduation day arrived with clear skies over the university quad. Families gathered in the stands while graduates lined up in black robes near the main stage. I adjusted the tassel on my cap and waited for my row to move forward. The ceremony program listed my name under valedictorian with the speech scheduled after the dean's welcome remarks. When the announcer called my name, I walked steadily to the podium and adjusted the microphone height. The audience quieted as I looked out across the rows. I began by acknowledging the collective effort that brought everyone to this moment. The words came evenly as I described how support systems shape long-term outcomes more than initial circumstances. Christina stood in the front section of the seating area. She remained on her feet for the entire duration of the speech, hands clasped in front of her. Her posture stayed upright through every paragraph. I glanced in her direction several times while delivering key lines about choosing reliable guidance over default connections. I continued with examples of steady presence during challenging transitions. The speech highlighted how consistent encouragement builds resilience without requiring perfect conditions. Midway through, I stated clearly that the person who had provided that foundation deserved recognition today. Christina's expression remained composed as she listened. Toward the conclusion, I spoke directly about the difference between blood ties and chosen commitment. I thanked the individual who had driven through the night years earlier and continued showing up without conditions. The phrase, the mother who chose to stand by me, carried across the microphone. A noticeable shift occurred in the audience as some heads turned. In the upper rows, Brian and Aunt Michelle sat together near the side aisle. I spotted them while scanning the crowd during a brief pause. Brian leaned forward slightly and Aunt Michelle kept her arms crossed. I met their gaze for 1 second, then turned my attention back to the main section and finished the final sentences without further acknowledgement. The speech concluded with a call to value actions over assumptions in building future relationships. Applause rose as I stepped away from the podium and returned to my seat. Christina remained standing until the next speaker began. Her hands moved to clap steadily once the moment passed. After the formal program ended, graduates mingled with families on the lawn. Christina found me near the photo area and handed me a small bottle of water. We stood together while other groups took pictures. She mentioned the delivery had come across clearly and noted specific lines that resonated. I thanked her for attending every rehearsal. Brian and Aunt Michelle approached from the side path a short while later. They stopped a respectful distance away. Brian started to speak, but I raised my hand slightly and shook my head once. Aunt Michelle attempted to add something about the occasion. I turned toward Christina instead and suggested we move to a quieter spot for photos. We walked away without engaging further. The afternoon continued with group photos from the psychology department. Faculty members congratulated the top graduates and discussed post-commencement plans. Christina stayed nearby, occasionally stepping in to adjust the cap or hold my diploma folder. The interactions felt grounded and unhurried. Caleb had sent a message earlier wishing well for the day. I replied with a quick update after the ceremony. The response came back promptly with a simple congratulations. The exchange remained brief amid the surrounding activity. Christina and I left the main quad as the crowd began to thin. We stopped at a campus cafe for a quiet moment before heading home. She reflected on the morning's events without pressing for details about the upper rows. I appreciated the space to process the day at my own pace. The drive back to the apartment passed with light conversation about the program highlights and upcoming steps. Christina mentioned practical matters like updating records and exploring internship listing. The topics kept the focus on forward movement rather than reflection on distant figures. Back at home, we placed the diploma on the table and reviewed the printed program one more time. Christina pointed out the valedictorian listing and smiled briefly. The apartment felt familiar after the formal setting of the ceremony. The day had marked a clear transition point through public recognition and private support. Evening settled with simple preparations for the next phase. Christina reviewed calendar dates for potential opportunities while I organized notes from the speech. The shared routine continued without dramatic shifts, built on the consistent presence that had carried through the years. The ceremony had delivered its official conclusion. Christina's steady stance during the speech remained the clearest image from the day. The public acknowledgement had been made, and the path ahead stayed defined by choices rather than obligations. Weeks after the ceremony, the formal separation became official. I changed my contact information across all platforms and sent a single message to the family lawyer handling my records. The document stated clearly that I no longer wished to maintain any connection with Brian, Savannah, or Aunt Michelle. Copies went to the necessary parties, and the process concluded without further discussion. Savannah faced consequences from the original accusation. A small civil claim was filed regarding the false statement about the gold bracelet. The matter resolved through mediation rather than full court proceedings. She ended up covering legal fees and lost a potential job reference due to the documented incident. Word spread quietly within local circles, affecting her professional opportunities in the following months. Brian experienced the full weight of the distance. He attempted one more outreach through a certified letter that arrived at the apartment. The contents went unread and were returned marked as undeliverable. Over time, his calls to mutual contacts decreased as the reality settled that one daughter had chosen permanent boundaries. The family dynamic shifted noticeably, with fewer gatherings and increased tension in the Evanston house. Aunt Michelle found herself increasingly isolated within the remaining household. Her role in the original decision drew criticism from extended relatives who learned fragments of the story. Conversations became shorter and invitations fewer. She continued daily routines but carried the visible strain of being sidelined in family decisions that once centered around her input. Caleb turned 17 that summer. He visited the apartment more regularly now that transportation arrangements had simplified. We sat together at the kitchen table discussing his upcoming senior year plans and college applications. Christina joined the conversations, offering practical advice on deadlines and scholarship forms. The three of us established a steady weekend rhythm that felt natural and unforced. Christina and I updated the apartment layout to accommodate Caleb's longer stays. We added a small desk area for his study materials and adjusted the schedule around his school commitments. The changes reflected a growing sense of stability rather than temporary arrangements. Caleb began referring to the place as home base during our talks, a shift that happened gradually through shared meals and quiet evenings. The psychology degree opened doors to entry-level positions in community support programs. I started with a part-time role coordinating resources for young adults facing family transitions. The work aligned closely with the observations I had gathered over the years. Christina reviewed job listings with me and helped prepare interview responses based on real experiences. Legal closure on the civil matter brought a quiet finality. Savannah's situation served as a concrete example of how documented actions carry lasting records in professional and social networks. No dramatic confrontations occurred, only the steady accumulation of outcomes from choices made years earlier. Brian's attempts at reconnection faded completely after the return letter. Reports from distant contacts indicated reduced family events and a more subdued household atmosphere. The absence of one member created gaps that no quick fixes could fill. Aunt Michelle navigated the resulting social adjustments with visible effort. Her previous authority diminished in everyday interactions. Caleb thrived in the new routine. He brought school projects to the apartment and worked alongside us at the table, and Christina assisted with math problems while I offered perspectives from recent coursework. The balance felt balanced and forward-looking, built on consistent presence rather than obligation. One evening, we reviewed long-term plans over dinner. Christina outlined steps for expanding the support program role while Caleb shared ideas for his own applications. I contributed details from my current position and the satisfaction it provided. The conversation flowed easily without the weight of unresolved history. The apartment had become the central point of daily life. Christina maintained her hospital schedule with adjusted hours to allow more overlap time. Caleb's visits added energy and routine conversations about ordinary matters. The structure supported clear boundaries while fostering genuine connections. Reflection on the path taken revealed simple truths about family definitions. Blood relations do not guarantee trust or support when actions demonstrate otherwise. The consequences unfold gradually through lost opportunities, strained interactions, and permanent distance. Savannah's professional setbacks, Brian's quiet withdrawal, and Aunt Michelle's growing isolation illustrated these outcomes in measurable ways. Caleb continued growing into his own independence with the benefit of steady guidance. Christina remained the consistent anchor through practical help and quiet encouragement. The chosen network provided the foundation for steady progress without the complications of forced reconciliation. The years since that single night had clarified the difference between obligation and genuine commitment. Hindsight showed that maintaining distance protected the progress made and allowed space for healthier patterns. The civil resolution and faded contact attempts reinforced that boundaries. Once clearly set, create room for new stability. Life moved forward with structured routines and measurable achievements. The support system built through choice continued to prove reliable. Caleb's increasing presence, Christina's steady role, and my own professional steps formed a complete picture of what sustained growth looks like when trust forms the core. In the end, family is defined by actions sustained over time rather than names on paperwork. When trust erodes completely, the most realistic path is acceptance of that loss and investment in relationships that demonstrate reliability. The consequences for those who prioritize favoritism over fairness appear slowly but remain lasting, serving as a practical reminder that choices carry weight long after the initial moment passes.